Hey everyone, it's Mr. Montgomery again. Today we are concluding our lessons on on electromagnetism, and we're doing that by talking about the electromagnetic spectrum. But before we jump in, I have something really cool I want to show you guys. Okay, so I have a little video, and it's going to be a ballerina spinning around in a circle. I want you to do one thing and tell me which way she is spinning. Is she spinning like counter or clockwise, spinning this way? Right? The way the mouse is spinning on the screen, or counterclockwise, going the opposite direction. Okay, so which way is the ballerina spinning? Okay, so the ballerina is going to start spinning, and just tell me which way she's spinning. Is it clockwise, like that, or counterclockwise? Have you noticed which direction she's spinning yet? Well, some of you are probably saying she is absolutely spinning clockwise, going this way. And others are probably saying, no, she's definitely going counterclockwise the other way. The funny thing is, this is based solely on your personal perception. So, depending on which part of the ballerina you're focused on, she is either going to be spinning clockwise or counterclockwise. So, try this. I'm going to start again in a couple seconds. I want you to start focusing on the shadow part and then slowly move your eyes up and see if her direction changes. And after you try that, also try staring at the top of her head and then slowly move your way down to like her arm and then see if the direction changes again. The cool thing is, if you're really good at changing your focal points, you can change the direction she's spinning in. And of course, you can look this video up on your own on YouTube by just typing in spinning ballerina illusion if you'd like to check it out more. But you're probably wondering, why are we even going through all this? And the reason we're even talking about it is because this is a video, and any video we watch it contains a part of the electromagnetic spectrum. And we're able to observe the electromagnetic spectrum thanks to our eyes, our vision, and our photoreceptors inside of them. But we'll get into more detail about all that stuff later. Not trying to confuse anyone just yet. Okay, so after today's lesson, you're going to be able to explain what the electromagnetic spectrum is and how it impacts our everyday lives. So, what is the electromagnetic spectrum? Let's make a little prediction. Do you think it's where baby magnets are born, physics of electricity, frequencies of radiation waves, or a wide range of magnets? Which one of those choices do you think would be the closest to being correct, if you had to guess? Alright, did you pick one? Alright, so the correct answer is frequencies of radiation waves. If we're going to go into the exact definition, the exact basic definition, the electromagnetic spectrum consists of energy waves that have electric and magnetic properties. And this is a picture of some different waves. They might be sound waves or from the electromagnetic spectrum, but I always like to point out to everyone that when we talk about waves, we usually talk about it in a 2D motion, where if you watch my mouse, it'll kind of go in kind of like a up and down motion, kind of like in the ocean. But really, all kind of sound waves and light waves move in a three-dimensional type pattern. So that kind of blew my mind when I was younger. Just something to think about. Okay, so the electromagnetic spectrum it all comes from the sun. The sun's light contains all these different wavelengths of light, but we can only really see one. So this whole list starts from the shortest wavelengths of light to the longest. So the shortest wavelengths of light are gamma rays. Right here at the beginning, they are, what are they, 1/1 millionth or 1/1 billionth of a meter? They're super tiny. They're nanometers. Then we have X-rays, a little bit longer. Then we have UV rays, which are even longer, about 10 nanometers. And then we have Finally, visible light waves. This is the only part of the electromagnetic spectrum that we can actually see. All those colors from indigo all the way to red. So if we were to talk about which wavelengths of color are the shortest wavelengths, we would actually say it's indigo. And then as it moves on down, the wavelengths get longer and longer, and then red is the longest wavelength of light. And then if you think back to any sunset you've ever seen your whole life, what color is the sky? It's usually like a reddish orange tinge. You don't see any blue or green or anything like that. You see these orangey red colors because they are the longest wavelengths of light, and since the light is traveling an even further distance than what it was previously and has to stretch over a longer distance, the only wavelengths that are able to actually hit us or travel that far are the red wavelengths of light. So after that we have infrared, which is much longer. After that we have microwaves, which are going to be right around here. And then after that we finally have radio waves. So they are the longest wavelengths of light, and they actually go all the way up to the meter portion of measurement. But if you take a really quick look at this picture, look at the tiny sliver that we can actually see. Out of everything we just listed, the only part we can see is this tiny little sliver right here, which is like what, maybe 1/20th or less of the entire spectrum that we can actually see? It's pretty nuts. Just think about what our vision would be like if we could see more of these. We'd probably go a little crazy because there'd be so many wavelengths of light traveling back and forth and all over the place. Oh, and unfortunately these pictures kind of overlapped. Sorry about that. So the only thing that makes every single one of those categories different is their wavelength. And the wavelength is measured from crest to crest, so we can see from peak to peak right here in this wavelength. That's how you measure it. And it's mostly measured in nanometers. So if we go back real quick, look how many are measured in nanometers. We have gamma rays, X-rays, UV rays, visible light, infrared is even in nanometers. It finally starts to work up its way to centimeters. And that really doesn't really solidify into centimeters until we hit radio waves, and then goes into meters long. So it's mostly in nanometers. And, alright, let's do a little quick lesson check. How many different categories were there in the electromagnetic spectrum? Were there 5, 7, 6, or 8? Alright, hopefully you have one picked, and the correct answer is 7. There's 7 different categories. Okay, so when I was mentioning earlier that the gamma rays had the shortest wavelength, right? Shortest actually is a pretty important factor, because the shorter the wavelength, the higher the energy in that wave of light. And then the longer the wavelength, the lower the energy. So radio waves have less energy than gamma rays. And then visible light has less power than gamma rays. But it has more power than radio waves and infrared, because the wavelength is shorter than these, but it is longer than the gamma rays. Okay, and when we talk about any kind of wave or wavelength, we have to know the parts of any sound or light wave, because both of those travel in waves. So the first part is going to be the top, which is the crest. So the crest is the peak of the wave. And the bottom part is the trough. So one thing that may or may not help you remember it. If it does, cool. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. So a trough, if you guys remember any stories from history about the Wild Wild West, a trough was always used to give horses water. So this is a U-shape, just like a trough in the Wild West. This trough can hold water, the crest can't. So troughs are always a U-shape. Okay, oh, I also mentioned this briefly earlier about wavelength. So, you always measure the wavelength of any wave, whether it's light or sound. You measure from peak to peak, or crest to crest. Okay, so this first one has a very short wavelength because this gap in between each crest is very tiny. And down here, there's, of course, has a much longer wavelength because the gap in between each crest is much wider. But if I were to ask you which one of these waves would have more energy, which one would you say? The short wave, or the short wavelength, or the long wavelength? I did mention this in an earlier slide. So the wave that would have the most energy would actually be the short wave, because the shorter the wavelength, the more energy that wave itself has. Okay, I also did mention this, but if you don't exactly remember the answers, that's okay. You're going to do a prediction. But if you do remember what I said earlier in the video, let's see if you can match these colors correctly. I want you to put them in order from shortest wavelength to the longest. So starting with number 1. Number 1 is going to be the shortest. So which color would you put number 1 on? Is red the shortest wavelength of light or color? Is green, or is blue the shortest? And then for the number 3, you're going to put the longest wavelength of light. Is it going to be blue, green, or red? And then 2 would go on the last one, of course. So I'll give you a quick second to try to organize those thoughts. Alright, did you pick your order? So let's start with the shortest wavelength. The shortest wavelength of light is blue. So if you think back a few slides, at the very beginning, blue was all the way at the beginning with indigo, so that would be the shortest wavelength of color. Next, let's do longest. Let's do number 3 next. Which one is the longest wavelength of light? Is it green or red? Well, it's red. That is the longest wavelength of light out of these 3. And again, if you go back to the picture, red is at the very end, and we even discussed how sunsets are always that reddish orange tinge. And then finally, that leaves green in the middle. It's not the longest wavelength, it's not the shortest wavelength, it's right in the middle. Okay, oh, that's right. I totally forgot about this. Let's see if this will... it's not letting me do it the correct way, unfortunately. This is supposed to actually disappear when I click it, so we're going to do this a different way. I'm not going to have this on the screen for the full length of time. You can do this part on your own, where right now you could set a timer for about 30 to 40 seconds and pause the video. Stare at the middle of that picture for 30 to 40 seconds, and then look at a blank white wall, and you're going to see some really cool colors. Okay, but you have to make sure that you don't blink and you don't change your focal point. So if you're going to try this little visual experiment, just keep your eye right where this cursor is, right where the mouse pointer finger is. Keep your eye right there and don't move it. And you'll see something really, really cool. Alright, so you can pause the video now and then set a timer for 30 to 40 seconds. And then when that buzzer goes off, look away at something, preferably something white that's going to have some very easy contrast to it. You don't want anything dark because it might not really work very well. But white kind of allows any color to show up, which is why you'd want to use white. Even if you just have a blank piece of white paper, that'll do just fine. So after that timer goes off, look at that white piece of paper and you'll see some really cool stuff. And then also, same thing for this one. 30 to 40 second timer, and then look at something nice and white. It'll allow for easy contrast, and you'll see some really cool colors and stuff. But just pause the video for that, alright? But you're probably wondering, why was that even a big deal? Why was I having you guys do that? Why was I giving you the choice to stare at those really weird pictures? Well, the cool thing is, we actually experience something called neuronal fatigue with our photoreceptors that we're about to learn about. And photoreceptors are just really, really cool. They allow us to see any kind of light. They allow us to see color. There are 2 different kinds of photoreceptors that each have very important jobs. And the first kind of photoreceptor we're going to talk about are the rod photoreceptors. So in the picture, it's these blackish gray photoreceptors here. They don't have a lot to do, and they don't really do that much compared to the cones. The cone photoreceptors, the other ones, these blue, red, and green guys, they are super, super important. They do so much for us. And the cone photoreceptors are actually right here above a blind spot we have in our eye. Now, if we were in person, I would have you guys try something really cool. You can actually make a plus sign and a dot on the same page, close one eye, and slowly move it, the paper back and forth, and you can make that dot disappear. And that's all due to a blind spot in our eye because of where all the nerve cells converge from all these photoreceptors, because all these photoreceptors are attached to nerve cells, and then these nerve cells need to get to our brain somehow. So they all bunch up in the back of the eye and send the signals through multiple neurons to get to our brainstem and then eventually to our occipital lobe. So if you position anything correctly, kind of like in front of or to the side of your eye and change your focal point, you can make stuff just disappear because your brain is always trying to fill in that blind spot. So that way you never know it's actually there. It's pretty cool. And like I was saying, so right above that you have the fovea, which is where most of the cone photoreceptors are. They're always bunched up there to give us the greatest visual acuity. So that way it gets pretty much directly lined up with the lens. So any kind of light that gets directed into the eye will get redirected back to the fovea to give us the greatest visual acuity so we can see everything properly. Oh, and you're probably thinking, why are these photoreceptors green, red, and blue? Well, of course, they're not naturally that color, but they made them that color in the picture because we actually have 3 different kinds of cone photoreceptors. We have ones that detect very short wavelengths of color, like blue. We have photoreceptors that can detect medium wavelengths of light or color, such as green. And then we have a third cone photoreceptor that detects long wavelengths of light, just like red. So if you ever hear anyone talk about color blindness, it's very rare if someone is completely colorblind, meaning they only see in black and white. For that to happen, they would have to have no cone photoreceptors at all. That means no short wavelength, no long wavelength, no medium wavelength. Absolutely none of them. And they only have rod photoreceptors. If I remember the term correctly, they're called monochromates or chromats, and they only see in shades of gray, which is kind of weird. So that's all they can see, and they don't see any color ever. But many people just have a form of color blindness where they are just missing one of these cone photoreceptors. So if they're missing a long wavelength photoreceptor, those reds and oranges are going to appear maybe brown instead. They don't show up properly. And then for blue, well, they're not going to see blue. They might appear a slightly different color. And then same thing for the medium wavelength. They don't really see green, and they appear as something else, maybe more yellowish or maybe slightly more bluish or teal. They never really see that real vibrant green color. Okay, and so going in a little bit more in depth about these photoreceptors, the cones, they have 2 very important jobs. One, they detect color, as we were already discussing, and they allow for a greater visual acuity. Without these, you're not going to be able to focus on very fine detailed things, like anything in a video game that might be a little smaller. Without these cone photoreceptors, you don't see that fine detail of any item in a video game. Crazy, right? And as for the rod photoreceptors, they have one very important job. They detect light. That's about it. They're not responsible for giving you great visual acuity or any fine details. Just detecting light. That's it. So if you were born without cone photoreceptors, your vision would be kind of blurry, unclear, and just gray and very dark. Wouldn't be very exciting. Alright, and to wrap up today's lesson, let's do a little quick check-in. Which photoreceptor gives you the greatest visual acuity? Do you remember what its name was? If you don't, it's okay. It was the cone photoreceptor. They give you greater visual acuity, give you color, let you see fine details. They're awesome. But that is the end of this lesson for today, guys. I hope this was helpful. If you are rewatching this to help study for a test, I hope to help refresh your memory a little bit. If you have any questions, please make sure you ask me in class, and I'll be more than happy to answer it. But that's about it. Hopefully this is helpful, and I'll see you guys next video. I hope you have a great night. See you later.